Well, hello everyone. This is Misty Ralston, and this is,
Jill McLennan.
and we are here for our first webinar together to discuss about advanced planning at the end of life, conversations of love. And we are going to make this just a conversation. So if you have any questions, put your question in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. But I had the great opportunity of meeting with Jill a few weeks ago, and she was telling me what she did. And I have heard of a birth doula. I had even done a paper on a birth doula when I was in law school. Never had heard of a death doula. And I was just simply fascinated as we were talking. And I said, we need to do a talk together. And she was like, yes, we do, because I know about medical documents, but I know enough to be dangerous. So I need that too. So it was the perfect, I think, ability for us to get together and do this and just educate the community, give you guys some ideas and things to think about, whether it's sadly yourself or a spouse that's dealing with end of life issues, if it's a parent or friend. A lot of us have seen a lot of loss the past few years, and starting with the pandemic and people getting sick. And this is a great opportunity for us to speak. So, Jill, I'm going to let you start and talk to people about exactly what a death doula is and what you do, and excite them like you excited me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Misty. It is really lovely to get together like this. And if anybody's even watching this as a replay, because we are recording it so people can watch it later, if you have questions afterwards, just message us and we'd be happy to answer any questions. But again, my name is Jill and I am a death doula. And I know a lot of people, as soon as they hear me say that, they flinch a little bit. They're like, oh, she said the D word. But I promise, death is part of life. We're all going to have to face it at some point, and it will be easier for us to face it the more that we talk about it, the more that we get comfortable with it. And that's a lot of the work that I do as a death doula. I don't do the legal paperwork. I leave all that to Misty, but like she said, I know enough about it to be dangerous in that one of the big conversations that I have with my clients and their families is about the importance of talking about what we want at the end of life and making sure that it is down in legal paperwork. We could have the conversation all we want to, but if, so many people say to me, oh, well, my kids know what I want. My husband knows what I want. Are you sure? And also, even if you think that they're going to be okay under stress, they might not remember even what you talked about. So it's important that you have this conversation, but then also have it written down. And so as a death doula, I do work with people before, during, after death. And that just means that I can work with people helping them get prepared. So how to have the conversation, what's important to think about. So this way, when you go to Misty, you've already thought about some of these important decisions. You've been able to talk to me, you've been able to talk to your family members. And then as we near death, whenever that is, I sit with my families, I educate them around the death and dying process because it's not like it looks like on TV. We all see it in movies. And in movies, it's either super traumatic, like people are getting blown up and buses are blowing up and it's that kind of thing. Or they're very peacefully, in bed, they close their eyes and that's the end. And it's usually not either one of those, right? There's this in between. And so I really educate my families on the realities of what end of life will look like. I will sit with my families during the active dying phase so that you're not alone. And then also I do work with people around grief. And so as a death doula, it's really just kind of working around all the different areas that are about end of life. But a big part of it really is always about getting prepared and having the conversations. And so, again, I can't do the legal paperwork, but I can help you have the conversation with your loved ones so that this way it can make an uncomfortable conversation a little bit more comfortable. It's partially uncomfortable because we've avoided it for a really long time. We haven't talked about it with our parents. We don't talk about it with our friends. We just avoid, again, saying even the word death or dying. How often do we say, oh, they passed away, or I'm sorry you lost your mother? No, I didn't lose my mother. My mother died. Like it's okay to say that word. And so that's partially why being here even tonight is really beneficial. It just helps you get more comfortable hearing somebody say it. It's not morbid, it's not heavy. it'll get easier the more that you do it. And so that's why Misty and I decided this is a great time of the year, right? Because it's all about love and relationships. And this is a really important part of being a human, being in a relationship with other people, is planning for these things and having the conversations.
So true. And those conversations can reduce conflict later. So many, I mean, we think of Tari Shivo is a perfect example. Her husband said she wanted something, her parents said she wanted something, and instead they spent how long in court fighting over what she would have wanted. And if she, because they thought, well, the husband automatically gets to make those decisions. And the parents thought, well, we automatically get to make those decisions. We're her parents. But that's not true. And a hospital is not going to risk being sued by listening to one party over the other. They're going to say, give me the legal documents. But even outside of the legal documents, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, the sitting down and having the conversation of what do I want done at my funeral, or even prepaying your funeral. You can even do that now, but sitting down and saying something stupid like, look, I don't want you to go into a lot of trouble, or I want finger sandwiches, or I want everybody to go out afterwards to our favorite diner that we always went to. Having that conversation takes the pressure off of your family and your loved ones left behind who are in the midst of grief, that one false move, they're going to be snapping at each other because they're in pain. So all of a sudden, one person says, I want yellow roses. There's an uproar because mom liked white roses better, and there's a 4-hour fight about whether or not you need white or yellow roses. And it can be something as stupid as that 2 years, 5 years down the line, they're still fighting, but they don't even remember why the fight started. But they were just in such grief. They were, what do they say? Hurt people hurt others, having that conversation and having the conversation of, what do you think is going to happen after death? What are your beliefs there? What have you learned? Do you want to have us bring in a pastor, a minister, a rabbi, whatever religion you want, or nothing at all? I think is just a chance for you to kind of reflect on your life. A lot of people, when they're faced with death, have a lot of regrets that they want to try and make amends for, and they only have so much time. I'm sure you've seen that where they're like, I need to talk to my daughter that I haven't talked to in 2 years. Can you help me get in touch with them or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there is a lot that when we near death, that we will start to process and start to think about it. And we want that closure. And it's not that it's too late at that point, but it is going to be more difficult at that point to try and get some of that closure. And you're right too about the families fighting and arguing, and having these things in place is a gift that you can give to your family members because it will help them know what you want with no doubts, right? There's no doubts, there's no questions. And one of the other things too that I will hear people say is, I don't want to be the one to make the decision to turn off the machines that mom's on. Well, if mom made the decision in her legal paperwork that she wants these machines turned off or doesn't want to ever be on them or whatever it is that she wants, you're not making the decision. Your children aren't making your decisions. The loved ones are not left with that burden of, well, I killed my person. Yes. Right? Because at that point, I can understand it. If you're in that position and the doctors are saying to you, hey, there's nothing else we could do. And again, Tari Shivo is a great case to really put into place where, that's a really tough decision for anybody to make, her parents, her husband. And so you don't want to leave people in that position where they have to say it's time, because machines can keep our body alive really almost forever. Right? Like that body can keep going if there's enough medications and enough breathing machines and whatever else hooked up to it. But that doesn't mean that the person's even really still there. Doesn't mean that there's any quality of life. I mean, I don't know about you, but that's not how I want to live. That's not living. And I actually have a question for you, because as you were talking about that, I know when I got married, I automatically thought, oh, well, my husband will be in charge of everything, right? Because he's my husband. We're legally married. And I know that that's not always the case, that things still need to be in place as far as legal paperwork, because even if I'm legally married to him, if something were to happen to me and my parents decided, you know what, that's not what we want for Jill, that he might not be able to do anything about it. So what is the rule in New Jersey, at least, as far as my spouse versus my parents or even my siblings, right? My next of kin, like how does that all work?
So for the most part, hospitals, doctors, and things will look at next of kin and say, whether it's your husband, your parents, or your siblings, or your children, who your next of kin is to make a decision. However, if someone else who has a similar level in your family, so your parents, your siblings, disagree, then they're going to say you need a court to make the decision. And they may have to get guardianship, especially if you're incapacitated. So they would have to get guardianship to say from a court, which means court fees, which means attorney fees, to say I can make the decision. Whereas if you have a gift and estate planning, whether it's your will, a trust, your medical documents, your power of attorney, they are not really for you. And that's why a lot of people put off, because it's not like they get a trip out of the deal. It's a gift for your family being left behind. So, you have with your medical documents, you have your HIPAA authorization, which I tell people all the time, and they get very upset when I say this. HIPAA doesn't mean I can't tell your medical condition. If I find out you have cancer, I can tell the whole world if I want to. HIPAA does not prevent me from doing so. It prevents medical professionals from releasing that information to anyone. So that's why you want to make sure that the people that you want to be able to call up and say, how did mom sleep last night when she's in the hospital? What's going on? She was a little confused by what you said. Could you kind of go over it with me again? Because when I asked her, she wasn't sure. You get that information. That's HIPAA authorization. That gives you the right to get the information. You can't make any decisions. You only have the right to hear the information. Then we have our living will, which a lot of people hear about. And your advanced healthcare directive basically says, this is what I want done. Keep me hooked up to machines for 7 days to give my family a chance to process and say their final goodbyes, and then take me off the ventilator. I have family in another state, so give my family 2 weeks to be able to get there in time to say their final goodbye. Get a month. I want a second opinion before they do anything. And it tells them what they do so that the person who's named as the healthcare power of attorney knows how long and what you want. When it comes to the healthcare power of attorney, a lot of people think it has to be my oldest child. Please stop putting the pressure on everything on your oldest child. I always say share the wealth, share the torture. If you're so worried about them getting equal money, make sure they have equal responsibility as well. But it doesn't even have to be a family member. My 2 healthcare power of attorneys are 2 friends of mine, because I don't want to have my sister or my nieces in those situations of having to be the one to say, I know this is what she wants. Just go ahead to do it. Or if the doctor comes up and says, there was a Bold and the Beautiful recently had a whole storyline that dad had said, and he had paperwork drawn up, that he didn't want to be hooked up to machines, but then the doctors came in and said that there was an experimental thing that they could try to save his life. And the one who had the control had to make the decision, and the family's all fighting with him. But he wouldn't, he didn't know that there was this other way. He didn't know. You don't want to put that pressure on them. It's a lot easier to have the conversation after you've done your documents and say, I've named Uncle Joe, I've named your godfather, I've named your older brother, or whoever, to be the one who's going to make the decision. Not because I think they're better than you or smarter than you or I love them best, but because I thought they would be the most that could handle that pressure of having to say to the doctor, it's time. This is what dad would have wanted. Can we let him go? Just let him go. Because that's, like you said, that's a lot. You're taking someone's life. And in the midst of that, you probably don't even think that way until like 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 days later, when you wake up and you're just bawling and you don't even know why. But because you had to have that decision, and it's sad. And I'm sure having someone like you to guide the family through that is such a blessing, to have someone who can say, let's talk about this.
And that is really a lot of it is, I have had conversations with clients that have said, their health is already not great, right? The one specific person I'm thinking of already, they're, a feeding tube. They've had all different health issues for like 30 years, like a really long time. But they had also that if something were to happen, they wanted, open heart surgery, and they were willing to have the ventilator for, a certain amount of time. If they were in a coma, they wanted it to be for 90 days so that this way they could get the second opinion, all these things. But then when I sat down and I actually had the conversation with them, and I said, do you understand what that 90 days will feel like for your daughters? That they're going to have to sit there for 90 days and just watch and wait. when you're saying to me already right now that the quality of life that you have is not good, even if you come out of that, it's going to be even worse. But they didn't know this information. They'd never had a conversation with somebody. And I'm there to support people, even, with some of their decisions, they still decided, I still want these things. In 90 days, they were like, yeah, maybe I'll go down to 7. I'm like, hey, 7 we can do. Because again, think about the fact that we are not just the only people experiencing what's happening. It is our loved ones that are around us. And there are a lot of treatments, let's say, that doctors will recommend. There's a lot of things that they will do that they know that you're either never going to come out of it. And even if you do, you're not going to have any quality of life. But again, we see in the movies, somebody comes off a ventilator, they sit up, they're talking. Oh, look at this. All my people are around. That's not often the way that it works. Exactly. That's not the reality. And so as a death doula, I am there to support my clients and their families, no matter what their decisions are. But I also want to make sure that they're making educated decisions and they're making the best decisions for them and for their loved ones, because it is a lot harder to turn off all of these machines than to never put somebody on them. Right. Because again, there's that decision of like, well, when do we do it? When do we do it? I feel like I'm physically doing it, even if you're not, like where if we already know somebody's in their 80s or 90s, they're, they're not well, they're at the end of their life anyway. Why put all of us through that?
And keep in mind, a lot of people don't realize this. The living will is not a do not resuscitate.
True.
The do not resuscitate has to be on file at your doctor's, and it's a form your doctor fills out with you. It is not a legal document that you get through an estate planning or an attorney. And a lot of people are just like, oh, I have a living will, but the living will basically says how long to take you off, because doctors, they have a Hippocratic oath, do no harm. And for many of them, do no harm says, I need to fight with every breath that I have to keep that person alive. It almost becomes, for some doctors, it was like they take that loss very personally, like they failed their patient when they die. So they're going to do anything they can to stabilize you unless you have a DNR on file. That living will say after they've stabilized you and they determine what quality of life you can have, at that point, what do we do? Do we take you off? Do we leave you on? Do we, have a set time period? Do we continue with nutrition and hydration during that time? And it goes through all that. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think the living will covers everything. And I always have to say, no, you want a DNR, you need to talk to your doctor and get that on file. It's scary because so many of us don't want to have the conversation. We think we're going to jinx ourselves, is what I've heard a lot of people. I'm going to jinx myself. You're not going to jinx yourself. I ask people about organ donation because that's part of your healthcare documents. Oh, I don't know. They may kill me to get the stuff. They're not going to kill you to get your organs.
No.
And that's another reason why you may be on machines, because it says in your driver's license that you're an organ donor. They have to keep your blood going for those organs, but then they need to talk to the family and say, with our organ donor, are you ready for us to do this? And that's why some people are like, well, that's why we pulled the plug. Well, no, it really wasn't. That's just the kind of thing that your parents or your sister or your brother or so much wanted, and it can happen at any age. If you are over 18, your kids should have their healthcare documents in line and their power of attorney, because things happen to college students, things happen to young people. It's not just for the elderly. I can imagine you have you ever been brought in for minors or little kids who have cancer to help those families? Because I can imagine that would be a really rough thing for you.
Yes, a mother of 2 young children, that is a decision I had to make, to not work with children. I have worked with people who have had infants that have died, because I'm not going to have more babies. So like part of me is like that I could put that in a box. Right. But and that's where too, I say to people, no matter how much time I spend thinking about death and dying and talking about it, it's still hard for me to think about the fact that I need to have my children prepared for the fact that I might die suddenly. I need to prepare myself in a sense for the fact that anybody in my family might die suddenly. Again, it doesn't mean that thinking about it and talking about it is going to make it happen. It will not make it happen, or else I'm going to say a million times that I want $1 million, right? If it was that easy, let's do that one instead. But what it will do is just make sure that I, again, have everything in place, that my husband understands, that if God forbid, if something were to happen to him or one of my children, I would still be devastated, but not thinking about it, not planning for it isn't going to prevent it from happening to me. It's not going to save me from that being what happens in my life. What it has done, though, is make me appreciate them and every moment we do have together in a way that I didn't used to, right? And that's something that I think is a gift as well, is that having these conversations with your loved ones in some ways really helps you to get closer to each other. It helps you to just kind of connect on a different level than we typically do daily. Because like I think we said it maybe before we started recording, right? Like it doesn't have to be a heavy conversation. You have a glass of wine, you sit down, you start the conversation. It doesn't have to be heavy. This is doom and gloom stuff. It can be a lighthearted conversation, but it is important to have it. And, I like to where you brought up about, the difference between having your documentation legally, but then also a DNR, which now actually a term that a lot of death care workers, let's say, are trying to use is allow natural death rather than do not resuscitate. Because again, do not resuscitate feels like I'm giving up.
Yes.
I'm just, we're not going to resuscitate that person, where really we're allowing them to die naturally. So there is a little bit of that change in terminology, and having your advanced health directives is important, but a doctor is not going to sit there and read through it, right? They're not going to be like, we're in crisis right now, I'm going to get out this 8-page document and read through it. Like, we're not doing that. That's why it is important to have the conversation ahead of time and get that paperwork done through your doctor so that they have something. But that's really also too why you have your, health advocate, essentially the person, the healthcare advocate that is going to be your voice if you can't speak. And I think that's the thing too. Sometimes when people are doing this paperwork, they're like, I'm making all these decisions and I don't want to make these decisions right now. You're probably not going to need this paperwork 99% of the time when you're dealing with things, right? If you're able to verbally communicate your wishes, they're not going to turn to that paperwork. They're not going to turn to your family member. They're still going to talk to you about it. This is only if you are in a place where you can no longer communicate your wishes for yourself. This other person kind of stands in and says, I know that this is what they want because we have it written down on paper and we've had the conversation. So it's not just the paperwork, it's really that conversation also that's important, because you need that person to be able to, again, not sit down and read a whole document trying to figure out what it is you wanted. You needed to have had that conversation with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting, some hospitals and some doctors have gone so far that if you can blink, once for yes and two for no, they will still consider that you have the mental capacity to make your own decision, which I think if you're in the middle of crisis, that's really not fair. This doesn't have to deal with death, but I am trying to let the public know that New Jersey actually does have a mental health power of attorney now, that for people who have mental health challenges, and perhaps they know they go through bipolar, or, times that they're manic or times that they're depressed or they're in crisis, that they can name somebody that even though they could speak, they know that they're not in that, when they're in that mode or they're in that place, they're not in the best spot to make their own decisions. And if you have mental health, you can have that form, drafted or fill out the form to ensure that people know it's okay to talk to my sister. It's okay to talk, my friend, because I'm just not in the mental place to do so. I personally think it should be like that for everybody personally. And there's part of me that says, well, we all kind of have our own little mental issues. So let's use it for everybody. But I don't think I can push it that far yet. But it's nice to know that that's out there for our mental health community, to have somebody that can speak, when even if they can, they're probably not speaking as clearly as they would if they weren't in the midst of crisis. But you don't, like I was saying earlier, and I lost my train of thought talking about something else. I have two friends that are in charge of my medical power of attorney. because I love my sisters to death, but my one sister, my older sister, would probably have me hooked up for like 6 weeks, painting my toenails and stuff like that, just because she wouldn't want to say goodbye. And I talked to a client today, and we were talking, and she said that her mother or her grandmother had lived to be 106 years old. And I was like, oh, God, I can't imagine living 106 years. And she said, towards the end, she would often just sit there and almost cry and say, all my friends are gone. My peers are gone. My family's gone. Her sisters that she grew up with, her parents are gone. Why am I still here? And it's not that she didn't have a good quality of life. They said she was the life of the party, was always happy, and she was in an assisted living that she loved the people there. But there were just times where she would just be like 106 years. That's a long time. I mean, sometimes we say it's been a long week. I can't imagine 106, weeks. 6 times 52 of that, But going back to what you said, we don't know how long we have. My brother-in-law is 72, and they go to Maine. They've been going to Maine for like 30 years now, for the summer, 2 weeks in the summer. And she says, how many names do we have left? You're 72, Phil, and you're not in the best of health. How many times are you going to get to go to Maine? How many Christmases do we have left? And I think when you bring it down to that, it makes it even more easy to recognize that you can't keep putting it off, especially as you get older. You want to be able to make sure that you can talk to your family and say, I love you, but there's going to be a point where I don't want to continue to fight. I just want the peace and let me go. And if you love me, you'll understand that. But if you don't have that conversation, it just is going to bring more conflict after you're gone, Or even when it comes to like our wills, I want so-and-so to be the executive. Okay, that's great. I'm not going to put a bonding requirement in there. Is that okay? Because I don't know if that person has good credit, or if something's going to happen and they can't get bonded. And now it has to go to the second person, or is that person organized enough to be the executor? Or do you want to put your child in the place of having to fight with his siblings because this sibling wants the gravy boat and this sibling wants the china, but she wants all the china and she wants the gravy boat too. And now that one sister's just sitting there going, I don't know, just can we fight it out? What are we going to do? Wrestle in the backyard? Because mom, because the will says split it equally between my kids, but it doesn't say how, and we're not going to go through every single piece of household items that's in the house and put that in the will. You can't. It would be 300 pages long. So these are the conversations you want to have. Have the conversations about who wants what. What are we going to do to get rid of the stuff that you guys don't want? Who's going to be the one that we're going to contact to do the funeral? Who's going to be who do you want to be pallbearers? Who do you want singing? Do you want a certain song? Because in the midst of their grief, they're going to be like, Dad really liked number 98 in the hymnal, but I don't remember what 98 was. It said something about a garden. Like they're not going to remember what the song was because they're grieving. Mm-hmm. But if you can have all that down and have the conversation with them, I would really like this. I would really like that. It's a gift. It's truly a gift that you're leaving behind because it relieves all the pressure and all the stress. And if someone says, why'd you do that song? You can say, I didn't pick that song. Dad did. So go talk to Dad. Oh, you can't? Sorry. Go talk to wherever. We have to start talking and not being afraid of talking about death any more than we would talk about birth. Used to be you didn't want to talk to the expecting mother about the pain of childbearing. We don't want them to know how terrible it is. They may not want to have kids.
Yeah.
It was Lamaze classes and actually sitting and talk how to breathe. Really, does all that work? No. But you try those different things to make it easier. My niece down in West Virginia, she's going to be doing, I thought natural childbirth was terrible. Now she's going to be doing a home birth. We're kind of going back to some of those things.
Yes.
And there are so many different options. Do you want a green burial? Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to, be sprinkled? Do you want to have some of your ashes made into a paperweight? There are memes even out there that says we took the ashes and put it into what do they call it? Hourglass so that mom can still play the games with us at night. Stupid stuff. They're to be funny, but they're conversations to have. I want to be sprinkled at sea. And when I have the conversations with my clients and I start asking these things, you can see the conversation start in their mind. And if you can do it in a lighthearted way, not so when you die, what do you want to happen to your body? I try and crack jokes. I try and keep it light. It's already hard enough to think about those things. But if we talk about it and we make it more normal to talk about it, it's a gift to our families. It takes that pressure off them, and then they feel comfortable talking to their kids. And you're really, modeling a behavior that hopefully will last generations in your family of not being afraid to discuss it.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Jill? or myself.
Yeah, because you can, again, you could pop them in the chat box if you'd like, or you could also unmute yourself as well. That's fine. All
What do you
good.
think, Joe? What's been the hardest thing you think for yourself as a death doula? What's the hardest conversation, or is there any particular thing that people say, I just don't want my kids to know this, or do they ever
Yeah.
confess to you something like a deep dark secret and then be like, don't tell my kids, but I need to get it off my chest?
Yeah, I have had some interesting conversations with people because, yeah, sometimes they just need somebody that they could talk to that is not going to judge them, and they do want to get it off their chest before they die. And for some of the people that I've had these conversations with, it's like they maybe just got the terminal diagnosis and they're like, oh my gosh, like the doctors are saying there's nothing else that can be done. Like this is real now. I've had clients that they're going through the process of, watching themselves starting to fail at different stages of their illness. And yeah, and they'll tell me things again, going all the way back to childhood. Like I've never told anybody this. Like it's just something I've been holding for a really long time. And really, sometimes too, that's why when people will ask me about being a death doula, I'll sometimes say to them, I'm actually almost like a life coach. I'm just an end of life coach because
Mm.
I'm there to just help people process their emotions, process their feelings about what's happening around the end of life. And in a lot of cases, I'm not saying anything. They're just saying to me things that they wanted to get off their chest and things that they wanted to process. But, it's hard to, everybody's going to be different, right? Like it's hard to say like, when you're nearing the end of life, I mean, hopefully, again, if you're planning properly and if you're having these conversations with people now and you're working through these things now, hopefully when you do reach the end of life, you're not going to have that conversation. You're not going to need that person to be like, I just need to tell you all these secrets because I need to get them off my chest. Hopefully you're going to have that all done anyway, but it's a process, right? Like it definitely is not something where you're going to sit down once and you're going to have this conversation because it's going to change too. Again, I'm 45. My kids
Oh,
are 10 and
absolutely.
30. What I want now is very different than what I'm going to want when I'm hopefully 95, right? My grandmother lived to be 94. And she was similar to the person that you mentioned, where everybody that she loved had already died. My grandfather had been dead for 30 years. All of her
Mm.
siblings were gone. All of her friends were gone. And she would say to me, nobody should live to be this old. And I'm like, well, grandma, what's the alternative? You could have died at 60, right? We don't want that. But, what she wanted at 94 is definitely different than what I want at 45. And so this isn't that like one and done conversation. It
Oh,
really needs to have, I think sometimes people will say for like milestones, right? For milestone birthdays, or if you get married, or if you get divorced, or if you have children, right? Those are times when you should really revisit these conversations and think about what you want so that, it can change with time.
so we have a question in the
Yeah.
chat. It says, would you recommend a consultation with a death doula for dementia or Alzheimer's clients while they can still have those conversations, like before the end stages?
Oh, yeah.
I know what you would say, but go for it, Jill.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's where I will have people say to me, well, when should I hire you? Like when we're actually like facing death. I'm like, no, honestly, you should have the death doula come on early. Like if somebody gets a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's or even cancer, right? Even if you're going to go through all the treatments, let's start this conversation now. Let's talk about what you'll want, how you want things done. And then this way, as it progresses, I'm really just like the advocate to help you make sure that what you want happens. So, because again, I'm a party that comes in and I'm not going to be as emotionally attached, even though, like, yes, I get emotionally attached to my clients, like we spend a lot of time together. So when they die, I am still grieving their loss. But it is going to be easier for me to come in and work with the doctors and work with the families and work with all the moving parts essentially, because I know that I'm just really advocating for my client. But it is going to be harder to advocate for somebody with dementia if I meet them when they're already at a point where they're not clear on what they want. And that's just such a terrible disease too, because, you know, it really robs people of so much. So
Tell my
definitely,
clients
you
the same.
know,
I tell
what's
my
that?
clients, I said, I tell my clients the same. You know, if you have a history of dementia, Alzheimer's in your family, I ask that pretty much at all my sessions. And I say, if you start to see it decline, as soon as you start to see it, I want you to come in. You know, we do 3-year reviews anyway, but I want you to come in because I want to change your power of attorney, your husband's power of attorney, not to be you. We're going to move up that second person because if something happens to him while you're in the midst of dementia, now he's not protected either. You know, we want to make sure all the documents are up to date. We've made any changes because, like you said, what we want at 40 is not the same as we want at 60, is not the same as we want at 80. So it's so important. But how would they find you? Like, I think for me, everyone knows a financial advisor, knows an estate planner, you know, funeral directors know estate planner. You know, everyone seems to know estate planners. They just Google estate planning attorney and a whole bunch comes up. How do the families find you besides just going Google death doula?
Yeah, well, and that's the hard part of being a death doula now as a business, is that first off, most people don't know that we exist. So there's not a lot of people just Googling death doulas, you know, it's
Exactly.
not
I
like
wouldn't have
people
thought of
are,
doing it.
yeah, right? Like people aren't going, oh, you know, my loved one has a terminal diagnosis, I'm going to hire a death doula. They're just going, I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start. So now that's why I spend a lot of time talking to other people like you and like people that just work with the elderly so that they know that I exist. So that hopefully if they have a client and they're like, you know, they could really use a little extra guidance, they might think to recommend me. But really, again, I try to encourage people, no matter what your age, no matter what stage of life you're in, you can work with a death doula. We can help you. I have one client actually that originally she hired me on to help her deal with her grandfather dying. And now we're working around her fears of death and dying because she was like, you know, I'm realizing now it actually really affects my life. Like I get that anxious about death and that anxious about dying. And so now we're working together to make sure that she can just be okay with the fact that we're all, because again, I think most people, if you really were to ask them, do you want to live forever? Again, what happens when we get to be 100 and everybody we love dies? Do we really want to live forever? No, we don't want to. So what are we really afraid of? And
Right.
when we dig into those fears, most people are afraid of the suffering of, again, like the Alzheimer's, the dementia, the cancer treatments, like they're more afraid of the suffering, not the actual death. Well, there is things we can do about that, especially if we have these conversations. And it's just, we avoid the conversation. So that's why we're doing this tonight, right? To encourage the
Exactly.
conversation. Yeah.
I am so excited to have met you because like you said, I would not have thought to, you know, death doula. You know, I
Mhm.
have a family member right now who is by marriage, so I don't really have a say in saying you need to do this, but I've kind of
Yeah.
hinted at this to my niece and her husband, and I want to send the video to them to watch in their own time because his mom is suffering right now through dementia and Alzheimer's, you know, and that's a hard place to be.
Yes.
You know, and I don't know if they've ever really sat down with each other, even just to talk and say, how am I going to deal with when she's not here anymore? How
Yeah,
am I
and
going
that's
to?
actually one of the things that I do as well. And I'm in the process of creating like an online course that somebody could just buy the course and go through it at their own pace, but for caregivers, because so many of us, as much as again, I don't even want to think about it myself, right? My parents are aging. I
Mhm.
don't have the financial means to hire a full-time caregiver for my mother. So what's going to happen if and when my mother needs a full-time caregiver? How am I going to navigate that? You know, I know now what to do and who to call and what to plan for and all these other things, but a lot of people don't. And so, you know, part of the work that I do, I have, you know, two people that I've been working with recently that are caregivers. And one of them, it's, her, you know, her husband. And she was like, you know, I am getting older as well. This is just going to get harder. I'm going to need more help. How do I have that conversation with my children? How do I have that conversation with the people around me that eventually I'm not going to be able to do this by myself? And
And
so that's part of, yeah.
I'm sorry, even if you have the physical capability of doing it, the toll and the emotional stress that it brings to a person to be the caregiver. I met with a client yesterday and I said, "Are you the only child?" And I could just feel the energy coming off her. I could see it in her face. She's exhausted.
Yep.
She has left her job. She sold her home to move in with her mom because she promised her mom, "I'll never put you into a home. I will make sure that you die at home. It'll be okay." And her mom, she's taking care of her mom. And I said, "You don't have any other family that can help?" "Well, I have a brother. He comes over Monday nights." I said, "Who cooks dinner on Monday nights when he comes over? Does he bring food? Does he cook?" And she just looked at me. I was like, and I even went so far to tell her, "Listen, if you need someone to pick up the documents, or if you need me to have a mobile notary come to have you sign documents or what have you, I can do that. I would rather find somebody, have my paralegal go, have myself go to your house and not have you get someone to come in and watch mom and have you take that person to watch mom for you to go get a cup of coffee and sit by the lake at a park, go for a walk, go to a movie, get your hair cut, get your nails done, do something for yourself, because you're going to end up in the hospital because you're going to be so burnt out. They can't do it by themselves." So even if they're young and they have all the energy in the world, there's only so long that you can play that caretaker role before the toll comes on you.
Yes.
It's important for siblings to have the conversation of what happens. Mom does not want to leave her house. We want to keep her in the home. We need to make a schedule. I wasn't even close to my mom. None of us were. We had my mom had some issues. But we all the four girls came together as she passed to take care of her. And we had a schedule, who was going to spend the night at the house on what nights and who was going to be there. So it didn't all fall on one person, and we could say at the end of our lives that we did what was necessary to help her, even though she had her own issues. And there were some interesting conversations. I wish we had known about a death doula. I guess she's been gone maybe 10 years now, because if nothing else, she would have been entertained. But I think she would have appreciated that, because I know she had a lot of regrets and stuff.
Yeah.
But Mary, thanks for coming. I see that you're saying so interesting and thought provoking. Have a good evening. I hope you have a good evening as well. If you're still here, take care. Oh, she left.
That's okay. Yeah. But yeah, and it's, I think even for me, some of it is when somebody is nearing the end of life. It does, like I said earlier, it's not the greatest time to get all the closure that we need, but it does give us some opportunity to heal our relationship with somebody. But it's not going to be easy, especially because there's the day-to-day tasks that are exhausting and they're thankless, like nobody's going to be there saying to you, "Great job. Thanks for cleaning mom up. Thanks for changing her adult diapers. Thanks for making sure she's getting turned so she doesn't get bed sores." Like, those are not the types of things that we're going to do and have somebody else be there and be like, "Thank you for doing it." But you're right that, like, having the conversation ahead of time, maybe that's not going to be a job for everybody. But then that means that also maybe your brother could be the one that can come over and cook dinner or have dinner delivered every night. Maybe he works a lot, but he's got the money to afford making sure that you and mom can eat. And that takes that burden off of you. But if you don't ask, he's not necessarily going to think to do it. And if you don't ask the right way, yeah, it's going to be like, if you wait until you're so frustrated that you do that, well, the least you could do is do this thing. Well, nobody reacts well to that.
Right.
So let's have the conversation. And that's where, too, as a death doula, I can mediate those conversations, right? I've had people say to me, "Oh, I don't know. I don't want to sick my sister on you because she's, the worst." And I'm like, "Look, I can handle your sister, I promise." Like, I can handle that.
You just need someone to look at it from a different point of view. I do a lot of mediation. Sometimes it's just, let me paraphrase what you just said and repeat back to you what you just said. And sometimes when you do, they're like, "Yeah, that's not what I meant. I know that's exactly word for word what I said, but I didn't mean it that way. What I meant was," and you can get that conversation open, sitting down and just saying, "Okay, I get, like, I may not be the person that's really good at changing mom's diaper, or a guy's probably not going to want to change his mom's diaper. He's just not going to feel comfortable. But come by after she goes to bed and let you go out with some friends or go to a movie or go to bed early and take a shower and not have to worry about mom." Something as simple as, like you said, sending DoorDash, ordering the groceries and having them picked up and helping putting them away. Making sure that the phone calls get made. Somebody needs to cut the grass. Somebody needs to take care of the snow.
Taking out trash, right? Like, anything like that is a huge help for people, but we don't think to offer those things. We just say, well, if you need something, let me know.
Right. And
Okay,
in the midst
sure.
of everything else, the last thing you want to do is then have to call somebody because it's just easier. I'll just do it myself and call and wait until they come over. And then it doesn't get done. And like you said, it just builds it up. And then even if you get past, it's, why should you get 50% of everything mom did? You did nothing and I did everything. I don't care what our will says. You didn't spend the money. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. I went through my savings to pay for somebody to cut the grass while you just sat and came over once a week and had dinner and left. You didn't even do the dishes, and that's not what mom wants. That's not what dad wants. He doesn't want you fighting. So again, what's the best way for people to reach you? Because I know that we're getting close to the end of the hour. What's the best way for them to reach you, Jill?
Email's always great. It's just Jill at End of Life Clarity. That's my business name, End of Life Clarity. I'm on all social media under that name as well, so people can always reach me that way. But what I'll do is when we send out the recording to everybody that registered, we'll make sure that both of our contact information's in there. I even have like a resource page that just kind of has like death positive, websites and things, help people, right? It just help people get a little more comfortable. It's got resources for dementia, for all these other things. So I'll put that in the email as well. So it's easy for people to find us.
Perfect. And just please put my information on it. Ralston Law, Ralston, because I say it weird if people say law. You can find me all over Facebook as well. You definitely want to get those documents in place. You definitely want to have the conversations. You definitely want to have somebody in your pocket that you can bring in, as whether it's a mediator between you and your family, whether it is someone to just get things off your chest. Maybe you need to talk to somebody because you have been diagnosed and you don't know how to tell your family.
Yeah.
How do I broach this with my family? And what a great person to reach out to Jill and say, how do I even have this conversation? I have no idea how to even start it, because every time I think about it, I start bawling or I get emotional myself. There's a lot that happens when we find out that we're not invincible and we're not going to live forever. And we're not going to live, I think if we could live forever at of our 25 or 30-year-old bodies, with all the people that we love at that age, it would be different. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. And that's why when we get older, we realize that living a long, long time may not be a gift. But thank you, Jill, for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you invited me.
I'm sorry?
I said, I'm glad you invited me. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm glad you set this up. You were the queen of this. Nancy, thank you for attending. Anybody who is watching this on recording, I know once I get it, I'll be putting it on my Facebook and sharing it with people. I think both of us can say, have the conversation. Don't put it off. Talk to your families. Give them a gift of love and a gift of support and caring. And don't be afraid. Have the courage to say, this is what I want, this is what I need, and this is how I need it. Anything else from you, Jill?
No, I think that was perfect.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.